we know that for, there were periods of time where organizations were collecting data just for the sake of collecting data.
Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Trend Detection Podcast. I'm really pleased to be joined by an external guest today, Antonio Santos. And I'm going to say and introduce you as an expert in digital transformation, Antonio. So you've got a lot to live up to on that side of things. But no, you've got a lot of great insights to share around. We're going to talk about smart factories today, which is a term I've heard in lots of different conversations in different contexts. But I'm really keen to sort of dive into the topic in a bit more detail and just help people build out a better understanding of it, because I'm sure there's lots of definitions and lots of different meanings people apply to it. But I guess before we go into that, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself first of all to the audience, what you do, and some of your background would be great.
My name is Antonio Santos. I'm Portuguese. I work in Ireland. I work in the military for quite some time, where I went to some transformation projects, and then I went into technology, starting to work in telecoms. I have a period that I worked for Siemens years ago, and then I also working in transformations, helping customers to different technology transitions at the time. And then I move into Atos, where I'm in today. I work in still in transitions, but a lot of innovation, digital transformation. I'm very focused on the topic of usability and accessibility. Everything that we do needs to be somehow inclusive. We have aging workforces, including in factories. So when you are designing buttons, when you are designing interfaces, you really need to make sure that you design things that mitigate mistakes. In general, you need to make sure that if there is someone that is colorblind, that person know what is the right button that they need to push. So those type of topics they capture my interest, and I think it is something that I've been advocating for a number of years, and is basically at the core of everything I do. And more recently, within the University College of Cork, myself and a group of professors and others, we created kind of a digital transformation lab where we do podcasts, we organize events. The idea is to bring a kind of external perspective from the industry to the university, and vice versa.
So actually, just I know we're going to dive into the overall topic of smart factories, but just on that collaboration with academia, how sort of important is that to sort of digital transformation as a whole? What does academia sort of bring to the table?
I think the academia is particularly good in bringing questions. That sometimes we are biased of working in the industry, talking with each other, with colleagues at work. And I think that there's interesting value where they bring a new set of questions. They bring some level of curiosity. And sometimes we know that professors and academics, they have a lot of time to research. They have a lot of time to read, more time than we have. So that allows them to have a different type of horizon. So that exchange, I think, is particularly helpful.
Oh, excellent. And I asked the question because I know within Siemens, I'm talking to a colleague in the UK next week about a similar initiative, say in the UK, where there's a collaboration between academia and technology vendors like Siemens as well. So it's just interesting you mentioned that as well. And of course, I mentioned you as an external person on the podcast, but you've worked. You said that you worked for Siemens for how long, Antonio?
From 2006 to 2011.
Fantastic. And what was your role during that time?
Part of my time I was working on Siemens Mobile, and then I work on Siemens Business Solutions, Siemens IT Services, and then over there we're working on transitions. Let's say we were winning a new contract from a big customer, and we went into the process of knowing the customer in order to be able to go into the process of delivering services for them, collecting information, gathering knowledge, creating our own knowledge, and then training our colleagues to make sure that they were ready to support that customer.
No, absolutely. No, very interesting as well. But if we start with the term smart factory to start with, and where did you first sort of come across that term? Maybe we could start with a definition of what it is, like I said, because there's lots of different interpretations of it, I'm sure. And then maybe finally, the sort of how it differs to sort of traditional manufacturing practices. So if we break that down first of all, so where did you first hear that term, Antonio? Let's start there.
I would say I started that term. I started to hear quite many years ago on linked to basically to when computers started to come up to places or areas where we work. At the time the concept was more limited, but the fact is you were able to use computer power to do many activities. The big difference at the time is that the technology was not as distributed as it is today around the world. So some countries, particularly in the United States, Germany, UK, and some countries, the level of sophistication of using of computing in the factory was much more ahead than in other regions of the world. So today things work much faster, even if there are some differences. The adoption and democratization of technology has usually increased.
And and it's interesting. You said it's sort of grown, from maybe the biggest countries around the world to
Yes.
to more of a global picture now. So what's been sort of the driving force towards that sort of shift towards the smart factory model?
I think one of the things that we see is basically the integration of systems, the integration of machines and processes, and then how everything's communicate within the factory. The sensors, then we have cloud, we have edge computing, real-time data analytics, how the data is collected and analyzed on a permanent basis, ongoing, and then bringing a lot of flexibility and allowing entities to adapt and work much faster. I think a very interesting example is that during the early days of the pandemic, there was many factories that they used to produce a type of product, and they used to be in a certain industry, and they were easily able to pivot to produce something completely different from what they were from what they were produced. So that I think that flexibility and that adaptability, somehow exemplifies some of the things that we aim to have in a smart factory. Of course, there are more things associated with it today, because we know it's unavailable to talk about AI, but I think we'll have time to go there to the rest of our conversation.
Of course. I don't think we could have had the conversation without mentioning AI. But maybe we could start by building the layers up first, because of course a digital transformation or enabling a smart factory starts with sort of data and collection, data's at the center of everything. In our case, predictive maintenance, it's sort of critical. So when did that sort of from your point of view, when did it start becoming critical for organizations, manufacturers to start collecting data from machines and different types of data? And so when did that process sort of start, I guess, and where are we today with that?
I think today that's paramount. Today that is something very critical. If you want to optimize operational efficiency, is something that you cannot avoid. It's a must. We know that there are periods of time where organizations were collecting data just for the sake of collecting data. Oh, we collect the data, and one day we might know what to do with this. And then, data was piling in the cloud. People spending money and resources on having that data somewhere without. It became a kind of a data waste. I think today we are in better conditions to take advantage of the data that is being produced. So I think we are better positioned to go into that process and to take advantage of all that data. And like you have said, you mentioned predictive maintenance. That's a very important area where data collection plays a key role in order to make sure that factories and places, factories, trains, every object is able to keep going as much as possible with minimizing interruptions within the cycle of the product, within the cycle of the solution.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, Antonio, about companies collecting data almost for the sake of it. Because I remember having a conversation a couple of years ago at a smart manufacturing event, I think it was called, and having a conversation with people, and they were saying to me that, oh yeah, we have all this data now, but we don't actually know what to do with it. Is that part of the problem? It's sort of like we need to collect data, but actually, it's not thinking about what's the outcome or what's the business problem you're trying to solve. It's more you should think about that first, right, before you start collecting data everywhere.
And in many situations, you are collecting data, but you are creating a cost because data when you are storing it costs you money. So I think I would say that in some areas, I think this brings us to the topic of skills and training and education. Sometimes I find it more important than ever to have a multidisciplinary approach to everything that we do, including in smart manufacturing. And I think today it's particularly important probably to bring people to the conversation that they were not here 5 years ago, and they bring value to help us to rethink how we look into data. I think it's in certain areas. I think it's particularly important to have a kind of a design thinking approach, bringing people from the design space, individuals who have a good knowledge in terms of how people behave and collaborate with each other in the shop floor. I think we need a kind of a mix in order to help us to make matter decisions. And we know that the age of the experts working in factories, in the past, the average age of people used to be much higher than it is today. So people today work in factories, they have less average in terms of experience years. So I think it's particularly important to bring groups of individuals in order to look at data and to support the decision making in a kind of a more efficient way. We cannot just lead this type of decisions for project managers, for people who in the past had that type of responsibility.
And I guess when you talk about bringing individuals together to solve these issues, we're not just talking about internally as well. Because I'm starting to think, where to sort of partner, organisations, and because I mean, like saying, I think it's quite common. We don't say that Siemens solves everything either.
Yeah.
We've got Siemens Accelerator, for example, which is is proof of that. But where do you see sort of partners, outside external organisations fitting into that? What you were saying.
I think organizations can offer different perspectives. Could be, market perspective. Some entities, they are more experienced from a certain market. Some organizations might have more experience dealing. Siemens for many years, for example, I think has been dealing with large players, and I'm sure today with the democratization of data and small, medium-sized enterprises are the ones who are in the emergency of transforming. So I think having people who have a good understanding of this market, I think could be also be very, very valuable, because they might see, I'm sure you understand this, that they might see, for example, Siemens as a big glass building. Oh, if I want to talk with Siemens, where would I go? Where would I start? So and sometimes it could be helpful to bring people who are more have a kind of a more network and relation with these small companies, to make the bridge between them and probably large organizations with Siemens and others. I think that could be an interesting area where external experts can bring some value as well there.
And I guess bringing these different skills together, maybe, because I think you mentioned it earlier about, the changing workforce and the new skills that maybe are going to be required to, enable smart factories of the future. So do you see, again, bearing that in mind, with the skills required sort of changing, I guess bringing in different parties to help plug those gaps is a good strategy from that point of view.
I think it is, and I've been looking, for example, for some of the work that NVIDIA has been doing, and for many years we've seen that NVIDIA was more closely related with gaming. And today they are basically bringing tools for the industry. I think one of a very interesting areas, and probably sometimes not something that we might look into more, is that the way our factories are designed today, the way our factories operate, they need a kind of a mindset that game developers have. What I mean by that, they are used to manage complex systems. They are used to create a lot of virtual design, creating games. And today, if someone is planning to build a new facility, they need to build it first in the digital environment. And I think that type of individuals can bring a very interesting set of skills in terms of mindset, the way how they visualize everything, and then they can take advantage of the technology in order to. I think that's an area. I was talking with a few people in the past about this topic, and I think it's particularly interesting how we can blend the skills and the knowledge of gamers and that mindset into the shop floor.
And that's a really interesting point, because I guess it's a lot of talk about how do you encourage more people into the industry, but maybe gamification, to a degree, would help with that. Make it, not say it's not an exciting industry, but it might, if it's perceived that way, it'll help to make it more appealing to the workforce. Yeah.
No, I think it's make it more appealing, and we know that. In the space that we might call industrial metaverse, you are able to have all these simulations of factories where the factory runs almost like in the environment of a game. And so I think this is is part of a natural process that should evolve.
And when we think about organizations looking to sort of transition to sort of a smart factory model, I mean, maybe you've got sort of examples to share of organizations that have sort of, I don't know if you can name them, but, just, like use cases around that, how have they in reality, done it? Because there's a lot of work that's involved in that, of course.
I think some of, let's say, I've seen some very interesting use cases. One is in when there's an existing plant and they want to transform, and for what I've seen more recently, there are very interesting cases in the space how you are able to use technology in order to save resources like water and energy. That has been an area where I've seen cases of large companies in the area of food and beverage who are taking advantage of we want to save water. We are located, let's say, in the south of Spain. So we also have many hours of sun during the year. So for them, that's the entry. That's one of the starting points into becoming into the space of smart manufacturing, how to take advantage of the sensors in order to save energy, in order to take advantage of the sun, in order to have more sustainable energy. At the same time, that they're able to use the technology and the sensors to make sure that they're able to save water and resources. So I see some very interesting examples there in terms of existing plants, but I've seen also some very interesting cases where new factories are being built first in the digital space, and then from that moment onwards, after everything is tested, they start the building process, and instead of doing the other way around, as was it was part of design by architects, and then it was going, and then everything was done on the go. And today is almost, you can almost simulate how a factory is going to work before the factory even exists.
Yeah, no, and that's so powerful. Of course, it saves time, resources. There's endless benefits to that. Of
And
course,
even training individuals,
yeah,
before the factory exists. I've seen some very interesting cases, particularly in the area of utilities, where as the plant was being built, the teams that were going to support that factory were already being trained using virtual reality. So when the factory, in the day that they were opening the plant, the teams that were going to do the maintenance, they were already up to go. They know where everything was. They were 100% ready to support that particular organization.
and I guess, and we could come into the sort of AI topic as we promised before, but when whether it's an existing factory or a new factory, maybe there's different perspectives. But how do you plan when there's so many different technologies and so many, and we talked about collecting data for a variety of purposes, but how can organisations sort of identify the best use cases to start with? Because obviously you can't do everything at once, is clear. But
I think that in some market there are some pressures of efficiency, and there are some pressures in terms of energy usage. So energy, I think all entities want to be more efficient, want to save more energy, want to make the factory more sustainable. I think sustainability is a very interesting use case from not only from the perspective of of cost saving, but also from the perspective of designing future solutions. So I think that's an area where there's a clear win, a very easy use case to justify in terms of implementation of this type of initiatives within the factory environment.
And with the emergent, I mean, AI is an emerging topic as we know. It's been around for quite a long time. If we talk about AI and Gen AI, are they sort of being pushed more now to the forefront in terms of technologies to enable smart factories? I guess, are they now being promoted ahead of other solutions?
I think some. In fact, I've seen some very interesting examples from Siemens actually last year at Hannover Messe, where people in the shop floor were able to interact through a kind of a chatbot and talk with the machines, through chat, in a very interesting manner. What I found is that in order to apply this technology in the shop floor, is not enough to have the knowledge of Gen AI, of artificial intelligence. You really need to know the factory really, really well. And some organizations have their core skills are pretty much on the AI side. So it's partnerships with those who know the manufacturing environment really well are really are key to make sure that the technology is can be used in a useful and relevant manner. It's not just Gen AI, let's bring it to the factory, but where, when, why? It's sometimes we tend to go on board of technology. I've seen several reports on adoption of AI, for example, in Ireland, and then you start to read the reports, and you end up being a little bit fun because some reports say 90% of the companies are adopting AI, and then the next report by another entity, it says no, only 20% of employees are using AI, and then you realize, oh Jesus, what is going on here? So sometimes there is this pressure to go along with the trends that sometimes people, they just answer, yes, we are doing it, because they feel the pressure to say yes. And then later on they are doing so. So I feel it's particularly important to make sure that you are doing it with purpose and with a kind of objective. And we briefly talked before about skills. We talked about that the average experience of employees is getting lower than it used to be. And I think a very interesting use case for using AI in manufacturing and in smart factories is capturing knowledge and information from people. Mm-hmm. We know that there are people from different ages, different experience in the shop floor. So sometimes not everyone is there at the same time. You are working in a factory for 2 years, but your colleague that is there 10 is not there in the same shift as you are. So if you are able to capture this experience, knowledge, and bring into the systems, it will be a lot easier for those who are new in the factory to use AI and then to have access to the information through the systems, to the intelligence system, that when other colleagues are not there. At the same time, we know that technology factories, sometimes they have different technologies. Sometimes some technologies are quite 20 years. Others are that's a reality of many factories around the world. So being able to capture this knowledge, I think it's a very interesting way to apply AI in a factory.
Yeah, and it's actually, since we launched our own Copilot in Senseye, it's something we've focused more and more on, is that knowledge capture side of things, and then being able to sort of surface it at the right times, in our case, to solve, issues with, or issues that with machines, or that will lead up to issues as well. So that's a really interesting example. And do you think that's sort of something taken on board in the industry as well as a benefit of technology? Because I know we talk about it as Siemens, for example, but is it something that manufacturers are really concerning themselves about as well?
I think manufacturers are something that they are looking at it, but I think in some situations maybe they need to find a space or someone that they can ask difficult questions. So you have mentioned before the Siemens accelerator. I think today, it's impossible to do everything on our own. So I think it's particularly important for decision makers in the industry to be able to exchange, to network, and to ask questions about, because sometimes somebody might want to run an initiative, and somebody might come in, that's not for us, we are not there yet. So there's always a resistance to change. That's part of human nature. So I think it's particularly important to look at entities who are already in the driving seat in order to get some confidence to get some use cases that they can then help to justify when they want to implement change in their own organizations.
And is that a similar approach to, of course, scale as well? Because implementing technology, if it's successful somewhere, you want it, presumably to be implemented sort of globally on a global scale as well. So is it the same principles apply to
it's very interesting that you mentioned that. Because I visit a factory from the food beverage sector in the south of Spain last year, and they were creating a use case to be able to, that they wanted to sell internally within their own organization. Mm-hmm. So they were justifying, they were putting together the report of the numbers because they were trying to drive the organization to move in the same way as they were. There were sometimes there are situations that create certain conditions. There were a kind of support, for example, from the Spanish government for organizations to transform, to be more energy efficient. So if you are in the south of Spain, sometimes water is a problem. Things are no. So you need to maximize. So they were somehow using the fact that there were the geographic conditions in that region were supporting the organization to be more efficient, and that experience would help other plants in other regions to take advantage of technology in order to scale, for example, the usage of sensors in order to save water as an example. But I'm sure there are other very similar examples that you could pick from this one.
And again, this is something we've talked about in the context of predictive maintenance and elsewhere on the podcast, but usually the key to driving these initiatives at scale is having sort of champions, people really driving this, not just for their own, in their own plant or whatever, but people who are driving it across the organization. So that's obviously key as well.
That's no. And then having the ability to sell the ideas within the organization is always particularly important, and you need sponsors of innovation within the organization. But sometimes organizations can be really, really big, and it's sometimes it's easy for people who are outside. Oh, this is happening here. Okay, that's interesting. And sometimes people who are on the day-to-day activities on their own organizations sometimes might end up missing something that are happening in-house. So I think trying to find ways to mitigate this, I think it's also very important, making sure that when you are doing this type of initiatives, you are able to communicate them internally and reach as much. It's almost, we are doing this podcast here today, and people are going to be able to watch it almost everywhere. But you need almost kind of a similar approach internally. You need to sell the ideas inside your org in order to find, I'm having the same problem here. Maybe this idea from the south of Spain might be helpful for me.
Yeah. Good. I mean, because it can often happen, even if a small project's been successful, it just doesn't reach its, good, which you might presume, we'll just scale it to other places and other plants, but it doesn't end up that way, probably for the reasons you described, that it's not communicated internally well enough or strongly enough or got the relevant buy-in.
And we know this, that, countries are working different ways. Some countries, in different organizations, play an important role in the driving seat of the transformation. And sometimes, countries, could be in Africa or South America, they might be doing something very interesting that might be overlooked. Because they don't. Sometimes they might lack certain credibility in order to make it happen. So sometimes there are also some bias within organizations about where innovation should come in or should come not.
Oh, absolutely. So I guess we've covered quite a broad range of topics today, Antonio. So thank you. For sharing that. It's been really interesting to learn more about this. As we usually sort of like to tie things up at the end of the podcast, just with some sort of takeaways for the audience as well. So if we bring it back to like the smart factory topic again, so what would maybe one or two sort of key pieces of advice for companies or manufacturers or organizations looking to sort of transform how they do things, become a true smart factory? And maybe we can focus on sort of, that scale as well. So not just, be very ambitious about this. If they're very ambitious, want to deliver this at scale, what would be your advice at this point?
I think it's particularly important to look at the examples that are happening today for organizations who are leading the way in terms of smart manufacturing, trying to learn the path that they are going to, trying to learn from their mistakes as well, because I'm sure they'll do some on the way. And as we had a recent example in the world of Gen AI with DeepSeek, sometimes money is not everything. I think ingenuity it plays a very important role in transformation and in smart manufacturing. And during my career, I've had in very different scenarios where sometimes people have this idea that this more expensive and sophisticated tool is the best one, and sometimes it's not. Things that are much more simple have a lot more impact in the process of transformation. So it's particularly important not to. You need a kind of a common sense, but to have that common sense, you need to gather a certain level of knowledge in order to be able to make a kind of a better judgment in this space. Considering that how much information we have available today, I would reinforce is try to follow some of the leaders, read, watch, look into what they are doing, but also consider something that I found particularly important and sometimes a little bit forgotten, is that in this process of transformation, we have people from different generations within the factory floor, different ages. In some countries, aging workforce is a problem. So I found that everything that you do, there are two areas that I see coming together. One is the way how you design for sustainability, the way how you make every process, everything into the direction of making the software, the code, everything sustainable that supports your efforts of decarbonization. But at the same time, how you make sure that when you design it that way, you also make sure that you design for your employees, design for your workforce. It's not just designing to save energy. How you make sure that you are able to mitigate errors when you design a product or you design an interface. How you make sure that someone with a disability is able to use that interface. Because we know that sometimes those are things that are not particularly important, but I know that when you design in that matter, in that way, you are designing for everyone. You are actually improving efficiency in the way how people use solutions.
No, fantastic, and very important. As I know you mentioned that at the beginning as well, so good thing to sort of reinforce at the end as well. But I guess one final question, Antonio. If people wanted to find out more about you and what you're doing, I guess LinkedIn is probably the best place.
LinkedIn is the best place, for sure. I also been trying another network called Blue Sky that some people might know. I've been trying that because people are moving all over across the different networks, and I found particularly interesting the number of, particularly in the space of the academia, in the number of researchers in the industry that are moving into that platform. So it's interesting to see how crowds move in the digital space, how they adopt new solutions when they believe that others are not working as effectively as they would like in the past.
Yeah, and finding new ways to communicate, collaborate, and share information. Yeah, absolutely. So no, thank you, and we'll share links to those in the podcast notes in case you want to keep up to date with Antonio and what he's doing and what he's posting about. But I guess for today, thank you again for joining us. Covered a broad range of topics there, some really interesting stuff. So thank you, Antonio, for sharing your thoughts and taking the time.
My pleasure.
Today.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone out there for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.